Chattanooga, Tennessee, David Mittelstat.
Okay. This is David Mittelstat, the smartest guy with a bow tie in Chattanooga. And I'm real concerned about a new business here in town. It is run by a resident, Anna Mittelstat, and her brand is Anna Victoria. It's a new line of clothing for children, and the line is called Mitt and Maddie. She got a call last night from Dad. Her dad is a tax attorney at Chambliss Bar in Stouffville downtown, and he's also the chairman of the Tennessee Bar Association Tax Division. And I have David on the phone, and I want to ask, first of all, David, about your daughter's business. What is it you told her about the general perspective of the ruling from the Supreme Court regarding internet taxes and the so-called loss reported by Andy, in the paper, about $450 million a year said to be lost by the state to the internet because the state cannot collect sales taxes. What did you tell Anna Mittelstat, the entrepreneur here in Chattanooga, yesterday about her business?
Well, I told her briefly that that there's going to be winners and losers as a result of this new decision, and I'm concerned about small businesses like Anna's because they don't have a lot of manpower. So you're looking at a potential market of 50 states plus the District of Columbia. Each one can have different rules for taxing interstate sales. But the new court case that came out yesterday doesn't really establish a standard. We know what the law was that was being analyzed there was a South Dakota sales tax law. We know what that was. It had a minimum threshold for sales in the state. So in that situation, some small businesses would be protected. But the Supreme Court case doesn't require that. And so one can see states that rely heavily on sales tax getting more and more aggressive. And little businesses like Anna's now have to sort of figure out what the rules are in each state and comply with them. And depending on the attitude of the states towards small businesses, that could be a huge burden.
Well, go ahead.
So, I think small businesses are a category of potential losers out of this new decision.
Well, there are winners and losers on both sides. You might say on the internet side, but also the brick and mortar people, they're small businesses too here in Chattanooga. David Mittelstat, tax attorney, they would say, "Well, I'm relieved now because I have to bear this burden of being tax collector for the state. I collect sales tax for the county, for the city, for the state. I'm subject to the Department of Revenue, and I have to make regular payments, and I'm subject to compliance and audit investigations." And internet people aren't. So in another sense, there's relief, and I say among the brick and mortars in Hamilton County, David Mittelstat.
Yeah, no, you're right. And Anna's business is an online business, and that's where my conversation went. Bricks and mortar are going to win out of this because they're already required to collect state sales taxes, and large bricks and mortar stores like Walmart and Macy's and the big guys, they're in many states already and having to set up the compliance and collection anyway. So the bricks and mortar guys are definitely the winners. The huge online sellers, the three in yesterday's case were Wayfair, which is I think a home goods seller with billions of dollars of sales, Newegg, and Overstock.com. They might see an outflow of business back to bricks and mortar. We don't know what's going to happen. But in terms of the compliance burden, those guys are already set up to collect the tax. I mean, it's not going to be a huge addition of costs to comply. It's the small guys I'm worried about, just because of the sheer volume of compliance that might have to be complied with.
Well, say something a little bit about, to emphasize the argument you're making about smallness. How small is Anna Victoria? Say something about how it got started, your daughter Anna's business, how it got started, what its product is, and it's a small operation. It was just written up about in Nuga.com. Is a new business?
Yeah, I mean, Anna's business is very small, and the Mitt and Maddie children's clothing line is brand new, so it's just a startup. Anna's been engaged in the business of designing and selling women's apparel for a few years now, and it's a struggle. But she's now like represented by a showroom in the America's Mart in Atlanta, and the business is beginning to grow. But her main business, the women's clothing, is wholesale. That doesn't have to worry about these issues. It's a new line, the children's stuff, that's going to be caught up in all of this because it's an online retail business.
So it's run. There's no store. There's no parking lot that she has to maintain. She doesn't collect sales tax. She's not open to the public. Right?
That's correct. And if it mirrors her women's clothing line, then that's beginning to sell in stores in different locations throughout the Southeast. If she ended up doing that with the children's but online at retail, she might have 10, 15 states to comply with. Now, again, it comes back to whether those states will have a minimum threshold like South Dakota did in the case that was decided yesterday.
Well, when David Mittelstat runs her clothing line, there are two lines, the new one being for children, Mitt and Maddie. If she sells to other stores, she's not collecting taxes, is that right? Those are exempt from taxation?
Well, for Mitt and Maddie, it would be selling to end customers who order online. For Anna Victoria in general, that's a wholesale business, so she just has to give a resale certificate to the store that's buying it.
Right, okay, when she sells wholesale, there's to say to other sellers who are the actual face of who are actually selling to the public, there's a sales certificate. She does not collect tax. They don't collect tax either. The end seller collects the tax.
They would in their own state. So let's say a South Carolina store buys wholesale some dresses from her. They'll put them in their boutique. They're all bricks and mortar, so they would collect the sales tax in their own state where they sell to the end customer.
Well, all right. So we have a business with your daughter. How many people work with her or for her, David Mittelstat, tax attorney?
Well, she's pretty much solo as a designer. Then she has sales representation, which is independent, an outfit called Ambrosia and Co. in Atlanta. And they have sales reps that go out on the road. And so when you look at the number of people involved, it's several people. But as far as her own business is concerned, it's just her. So if she has to now comply with state sales tax laws around the country, what's she going to do?
Well, that's right. She would have to probably engage someone who provides a consulting service, right? David Mittelstat, someone says, look, I'm in a small business. Here I am on the internet. I've got a service. You hire me, or you buy my software, or rent my software, and I will make sure that you're compliant with every state. Let me ask, is that what she'd have to do practically to comply with 50 state or 49 other states' rules on sales taxes, David?
Yeah, I mean, she would have to hire somebody, an external consultant to help her. I'm not saying that this is from a fundamental fairness standpoint. Yeah, the states have a right to collect taxes, but just looking at it from the economic burden perspective, hiring that guy or whoever it is going to be an extra cost. And in a business, that's struggling to grow and has small margins or is breaking even during its growth stage, that's a huge extra burden.
Right. A new business often can go, David Mittelstat, with several years, you can go 3 or 4 or 5 years without having enough cash flow from its own business to cover its expenses. So that means that many small businesses have to have personal capitalization from the owner or loans and things like that. And here suddenly you're beginning and you have this sudden new burden. Oh, I've got to have compliance with tax requirements on 50 states. Who can help me? I can't certainly research all those myself. So I want to have to engage a specialist and another skimmer, another business to provide this relationship dealing with all these tax jurisdictions. And I can't afford it.
The problem, right? Yeah, and I find that a lot of small businesses, and Anna's an example. I mean, people tend to wear a lot of hats. They tend to be pretty creative about how they get things done. And she's already staying up until like 3 o'clock in the morning trying to get stuff done now that she has. It's just another thing potentially. I mean, hopefully most states will be rational and will have, minimum standards before compliance kicks in, like South Dakota did. They have in the law that was looked at yesterday. South Dakota had a minimum threshold of like $100,000 of sales a year, or 200 transactions a year in the state. So a small business like Anna would be exempt, but who knows what the states are going to do, because that threshold was not part of the decision. It's just the law that was looked at.
I've heard that Tennessee's Department of Revenue, David Mittelstat, tax attorney with Chambers, Bonner, and Stockwell, is very reasonable and very up to date and very user friendly and public friendly. Is that true?
I find that to be true. I think Tennessee is a very business oriented state in that they know where to draw lines to get. Because I mean, government and business really acts in partnership. If the state's too aggressive, then it's going to lose business, and you see that happening all over the country. I think Tennessee is very business friendly, and in my own personal dealings with the tax authorities here, I've always found them to be very service oriented and customer friendly.
This is David Toulis. We do thank you for tuning in to the David Toulis Show at 927 Mega Radio, brought to you by yournews.com. Yournews.com. The number is 800-8949 if you want to call me, 800-8949. We do try to solve people's problems here. We have on the phone David Mittelstat, who is also the tax attorney at Chambers, Bonner, and also chairman of the Tennessee Bar Association's tax division. And he had a call yesterday to his daughter, Anna. She is an entrepreneur. And you may have read the story about Anna by Savannah Bennett at Mega.com, an online children's store. It's a wonderful new brand called Knitting Maddie, styles for boys and girls, easy to wear, preserved for years to come, and some cute pictures of some of the looks of this clothing line. And her dad's the tax attorney and called her, said, "Hey, there's been a court decision. I know you've been busy, didn't hear about it, but here's what it means for you." Well, David Mittelstat, what are some of the larger issues that we haven't touched on that my listener might want to hear about regarding this ruling, and let's say against internet tax freedom? The internet's been free. Now it seems it's not free anymore.
Yeah, I think it's kind of. It's hard to take a position on this because of how many winners and losers there are in it, and the fact that it ultimately is a pretty fair decision. It's just that the result of the burden that's placed on different people will change. But the Trump administration supported the result in this case. That they were advocating for this result. I think the hope is that there'll be a revival in bricks and mortar business. And I don't know that. I mean, I'm not an economist. You probably know more than I do about this, but I think that sales tax is really just one small component of why people decide to buy online. It's more convenient. Online vendors may be more efficient. They don't have the same in-store theft losses to carry, and so on and so on. So I don't know what the long-term effect of this will be in terms of whether bricks and mortar benefit substantially or not. The big online retailers that were resisting collecting multi-state taxes are going to be hurt in a sense if business flows out of them, because now their products are more expensive to buy online. But again, that's just the flip side of what I just talked about with bricks and mortar. In terms of compliance, those guys are easily going to comply with this, and the tax comes out of the taxpayer's pocket. So again, it's hard to see what will happen. As I said earlier, my main concern is that states don't become overly aggressive in thresholds for applying these new rules and overly burden small businesses. Because I think small businesses have long been a kind of forgotten category in this country. I mean, it's just tough to comply with the multiple rules that exist when you start growing and doing business across state lines.
Now, your role as a tax attorney, David Mittelstat at Chambers, Bonner, is that in clear this business? Do you do a lot of preparations for a business to launch, or what exactly is your specialization?
I'm mainly get involved in business transactions. There's a lot of merger and acquisitions, sales of businesses, looking at some formation documents, stuff like that. A little bit of executive compensation. Sales tax crops up now and again in an acquisition, because you have to look at whether or not, for example, if a business is selling all its assets to somebody else, is it taxable? under sales tax rules that varies from one state to the next and so on. But that's my focus, really advising businesses on tax issues.
Senator Alexander says the court's decision is good news for Main Street business and for states. And Bob Corker calls, according to the story in the Times Free Press this morning, Bob Corker says that the decision by the Supreme Court yesterday is a win for Tennessee taxpayers. And he says, I think most Tennesseans would agree that we are fortunate not to have a state income tax, and to help ensure that remains the case, it is important for our sales tax system works. Today's ruling is a win, he says, for states' rights and gives states like ours the ability to enforce the existing state law. So David Mittelstat, tax attorney, the legislature apparently has readied and maybe Governor Hassan earlier signed a bill that would let taxation begin, but it was all delayed. The invocation of the statute was delayed pending, I think, maybe this case. Is that correct?
I think so. No, I think over 40 states supported this case. The South Dakota legislature, I believe, crafted this law knowing it was going to be challenged and overruled, and they really introduced the legislation as a vehicle to get to the Supreme Court. And I think much of what you just quoted is correct. I mean, another category of winner in this decision are the states, and states like Tennessee are heavily dependent on sales tax because there's no income tax. And so, they'll be able to substantially increase revenue, and that's not a bad thing necessarily from a taxpayer perspective in general. The
story in the paper today, David Mittelstat said, if I could just mention this to the listener, $450 million is the said to be cost of the Tennessee's not collecting sales tax on sales to people outside in the other 49 states. So because Tennessee is not, the Department of Revenue is not collecting that tax, there's that much less that's coming into the state's treasury.
That's correct, and I think in one regard, this is a win for states' rights, and the court talked about that because the old standard, there was like 50 years of Supreme Court precedent that said that, under the Commerce Clause, you had to have a physical presence in the state before the state could make you collect the tax. And the Supreme Court now has said, well, that's obsolete. And one of the things that Justice Kennedy said, I think, in the ruling was that, there are certain things that states can do under the Commerce Clause themselves, as long as they don't unfairly burden interstate commerce. And the court decided that the old test, you have to have physical presence, was unfair to the states because it went beyond the reach of the Commerce Clause. And so to that extent, the state's right to collect tax has been strengthened by this ruling.
Well, that's good to hear. And again, David Mittelstat, thanks for taking the time to chat with my listener here at News Radio. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
We're talking with David Mittelstat, who is a tax attorney at Chambers Bar in Stillsville downtown, and he's also chairman of the Tennessee Bar Association Tax Division, and says that the ruling in Washington yesterday by the Supreme Court, which will be affecting his daughter's new startup business here in Chattanooga, is on the whole favorable for the rights of states, the authority of states to collect taxes of sales going out of their jurisdictions with the people in other states. The money coming in. They effectively ruled is taxable by state government. And the High Court overturned an earlier test that said there has to be a physical presence either of an office, a warehouse, or some physical structure in a particular state that before that state could tax sales from created by that particular business. That standard has been overturned, as we've heard explained from David Mittelstat, the tax attorney downtown. And so there's going to be new potential burdens on small online businesses, of which there are tens and tens of thousands of them, even in Tennessee, that sell sometimes just a few items here and there. But some small online businesses will not reach the threshold that states are going to be devising in the near future. That would be, say you have 200 sales to people in our state, you have to collect the tax, or there may be a dollar amount, you have to have $200,000. in sales to people in our state before we demand you collect the sales tax and send it to us. There are thresholds that are going to be enforced now across the country, affecting online business, such as the Anna Victoria line, a new line being formed here in Chattanooga. That's the Nate and Maddie children's line from David Mittelstat, who's a Chattanooga redneck. So listen, this is David Mittelstat. We put a local economy from market. We want to be more freedom rather than less. We're live on Facebook Live, YouTube, also on your smartphone at the TuneIn Radio app. Just search on Hunters Talk Radio. Make us your default radio station. Local economy, free markets.
3, 2, 1. Chattanooga Radio. Digital FM 95.3 HD4. 92.7 FM's news now.
The Cleveland Police Department says a 2-year-old boy was hit by a dark-colored truck, which then drove away. That 2